Right, good evening, everyone. Hi there. Welcome to Hackney Council's Planning Subcommittee meeting. My name is Councillor Steve Race. I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. The meeting will be recorded. It's being live streamed on YouTube also. Councillors taking part in voting this evening are present here in the council chamber. If any committee members are accessing this meeting remotely, they're reminded that they're not counted as being present for the purposes of Local Government Act 1972, and they may not vote on any items under consideration. Welcome to members of the public and press who may be here to join us this evening to participate in or observe the meeting. For anyone joining the meeting remotely via Google Meet, there's a chat function. However, please only use this to raise IT-related issues. As chair, I won't be monitoring the chat function. Meeting participants are reminded to turn the mobile phones off, please, or put them on silent. And also please note that any persistent disruptive behaviour will result in you being asked to leave the meeting. In the event of any internet outage, we'll adjourn the meeting and then come back and continue once it's resolved. And firstly, I would like to turn to my fellow planning subcommittee members and ask them to please introduce themselves. We'll start off with Councillor Desmond.
Councillor Michael Desmond.
Councillor John Norcross, Councillor for Haggerston Ward.
Councillor Ali Sadek, Councillor for Kings Park Ward.
Great, thank you very much. There are various council officers present at this meeting this evening, both in the room and joining us remotely, including to my left, we have Natalie Broughton, who's the head of planning and building control. We have Graham Callum, who is the growth team manager, and we've got John Sang, the enforcement manager too. The following council officers will be speaking to the following planning applications this evening. So on agenda item 5, Telephone House, we've got Nick Bouvard, who's the planning case officer, leading us off on that one. On item 6, Acme Works, we have Louise Prue, the planning case officer, who will be leading on that item. We also have in attendance to my right, Gareth Sykes. We have Sam Woodhead for covering off legal. We have got Mario online, who's covering off the ICT, and we've got Bowler, who is with us to cover off legal admin. Thank you very much to you all this evening. Some of you joining us this evening would have contacted the governance officer in advance of this meeting to register to speak. Objectors to the applications and representatives of the applicants were also in attendance. Before we continue, I'll briefly outline how the meeting will proceed. We'll hear each planning application in turn, summarised by the planning officer. We'll then hear a 5-minute statement from any objectors, followed by a 5-minute statement from any applicants present this evening. If there's more than one speaker from any of the applicants or an objector, they'll have to agree amongst themselves beforehand how they'll split that 5-minute speaking time. And members of the planning subcommittee will then be free to ask questions of the planning officer, objectors, or the applicant. In my role as chair of the planning committee, I will ensure that members have everything that they need to make a decision, that objectors and applicants have the opportunity to set out their case, and that the meeting runs properly. I won't be taking any contributions from the floor. You must have given notice to the governance officer before the meeting to register to speak. The deadline for registering to speak was 4 p.m. yesterday, and the speakers list is now closed. Subcommittee members are not representing either their wards or their political parties. Members will make decisions on the basis of site visits they've made, what we have read in the published application report, and of course what we hear this evening. We must make any decision on an application in accordance with the Council's development plan, which includes the Council's local plan, LP33, and the London plan, unless relevant material planning considerations indicate otherwise. Subcommittee members are reminded not to take into account or to discuss non-material planning matters, and when taking a decision, members should not have allowed themselves to prejudge any application prior to this meeting. Similarly, if a member has any interest related to an application on the meeting agenda, they must consider whether that interest ought to be disclosed, and where appropriate, they must withdraw from the meeting while that application is discussed and voted upon. When we've finished our deliberations on a planning application, I'll read out the recommendation as set out in the published application report, and the members will vote on the recommendation by raising their hand. When the decision is made, that is normally the end of the matter for this subcommittee. The applicant may appeal our decision, and objectors may seek legal redress. Finally, depending on how the meeting this evening progresses, we'll take a short break at around 8 p.m. And we will now go to the published meeting's order of business, beginning with item 1, apologies for absence.
Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Levy, Councillor Potter, Councillor Webb, and Councillor Young. And just to add, I'm not sure whether Councillor Samatar and Councillor Joseph are joining us this evening. They haven't indicated. I think Councillor Joseph might be joining remotely.
Thank you. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Does anyone on the committee have any declarations of interest? Just from myself, I've received an email on item number sort of 5. Yeah, item 5, which was a generic email about the development previously. Item number 3 is to consider any proposals, questions referred to the subcommittee by the council's monitoring officer.
None, Chair.
Great, thank you. In that case, we move on to minutes of the previous meeting. Members, it's the minutes of the meeting 8th of June 2023. Do any members have anything to comment on the minutes? Otherwise, could you please note them? Noted, great, thank you. Thank you very much. Great, so that means we move on to item number 5, Telephone House, Paul Street, down in the Hoxton Eastern Shoreditch ward. Nick, you're going to be leading on this, thank you. And thank you for doing the lights.
Thank you. 2022-1165 is an application to demolish the existing building and build a new 10-storey office building with ground floor retail units facing Leonard Circus and Cowper Street, and event space at basement level. This is a referable scheme, and negotiations with the applicant have been conducted with the assistance of the GLA. And draw your attention to the addendum, which adds a condition requiring that the obscure glazing shown on the submitted drawing should be retained as such occasion on the trip veneration figures that have been submitted. Looking north, the site is on Leonard Circus in Shoreditch, taking up the southern portion of a block bounded by Paul Street, Leonard Street, and Tabernacle Street. The site is currently occupied by a post-war 7-storey office building named Telephone House, which is currently occupied. Leonard Circus has recently been remodeled and provides a focal point in the neighbourhood with shared surfaces and street traders. The site has excellent transport links with a PTAL rating of 6B. This is the Shoreditch Priority Office area. Looking south, the site lies within a mixed context of office, retail, and residential properties. Scales vary quite widely, but shoulder heights are predominantly of 3 to 5 stories, climbing upwards as they move towards Old Street roundabout and the City Road. Development House, which came to committee in May, lies directly to the south across Leonard Street. This map from the design and assets in relation to the site. Here's the borough boundary, the black line. Only the servicing yards to the north of the site are within Hackney's Shoreditch Conservation Area, which is green here and also borders to the east. In blue is the Bunhill Fields and Finsbury Square Conservation Area in Islington to the west. The Central Foundation Boys School is grade 2 listed to the west, that's here. St Michael and All Angels Church is grade 1 listed here, with a campus of which the closest element is the grade 2 rectory building here. As such, while the great majority of the site is not within a conservation area, the surroundings are sensitive in heritage terms. The building is considered a negative contribution to the South Shoreditch Conservation Area. As a modernist addition to the streetscape, it has little relationship with the surrounding context, with the entrance leading to car parking fenced off from Leonard Circus. The need for post-war reconstruction becomes obvious from this image on the left of the block in the 1910s, along with the coloured map of World War II bomb damage, with the dark blues of this site and Development House showing the total destruction of the buildings on those sites. The awkward relationship between the existing building and the terraces of Tabernacle Street and Paul Street is clear in this photograph. This final photograph shows the 2 sites from Tabernacle Street, viewed over the Clare Street surface level car park. This vista gives an indication of the potential of the proposed scheme to help restore the damaged urban fabric in this sensitive location. The proposal involves an 8-storey frontage onto Leonard Circus and a 7-storey frontage onto Leonard Street, with setback floors above, reducing the apparent massing from street level and allowing the formation of rooftop terraces. Negotiations during the application process have led to a scheme with differing facade treatments to break up the impression of the overall massing. The floor plans show the proposed uses and layouts. For clarity, This southeastern corner here, that fronts Leonard Circus with Leonard Street along here. All right. Leonard Street along here at the bottom. The proposed basement of the building already exists under the much smaller footprint of the upper floors. Proposed at basement level, we see in the center of the image an event space. It seems likely that this space will be used in connection with the tenants of the offices above, but this is not yet clearly defined, and an event space within an open atrium, as here, will clearly be unsuitable for certain types of event. As such, we have required by condition that a management plan is submitted to provide details of exactly how the space would be used. The further condition limits the hours of use, and another important recommended condition ensures that noise breakout from the building would be 10 decibels or more below the background noise level at any noise-sensitive premises at any time. Elsewhere on the basement plan, we see a large cycle parking area in the top left corner, accessed by lift or stair, with showers shown on the left-hand side of this image. The quantum of cycle parking is considered acceptable, but at present 92% of the proposed standard. Nevertheless, since the floor space dedicated to cycle parking, showers and changing facilities at the basement floor is extensive, we consider that the recommended condition will allow the overall quantum of provision and the accessibility of the spaces to be found prior to the occupation of the development. Also on this floor plan, we see a large plant area in grey, some co-working space linked to the floor above, and some retail in red, also linked to the floor above. Ground floor provides active retail frontages, shown in red, onto Leonard Circus, which is considered a benefit of the scheme in comparison to the railings and dead frontage there at present. At the top left, you can see a cycle cafe, which addresses Cowper Street. The cycleway passes this entrance, and Cowper Street has been made a more important through route by the recent addition of a tube entrance to Old Street Station. The main entrance to the building is off Leonard Circus, as recommended by the design review panel at the pre-application stage, and it leads to the large atrium that includes the building. The majority of this floor is shown as in green as co-working space. This is connected but functionally separate from the office uses on the upper floors. The loading bay, shown in grey, provides off-street servicing for the building. It also provides 2 on-site accessible vehicle parking spaces. In order to ensure that sufficient holders, the clause in the recommended legal agreement requires a further 2 off-site blue provided prior to occupation within 50 metres of the entrances. Remaining on transport matters, TfL have identified a high level of usage of the existing cycle hire stands, agreed with the applicant to provide £155,000 to mitigate the impact of the development by the provision of more cycle hire spaces. Overall, the impact of the development in highways terms is considered acceptable. The first floor shows a fairly typical floor plan for the middle floors, from here to 5th. The great majority of the building is to be in office use, as befits the priority office area location. The affordable workspace offer has been agreed with regeneration team colleagues and does not propose a separate area. Instead, 10% of the desks to be provided would be made available to affordable workspace users at a 60% discount on the rent portion of the advertised office price in perpetuity. The offices are to be run by a familiar company in Hackney, Fora, who provide multiple amenity spaces and facilities for workers at the building, these space users. We consider that this is an acceptable arrangement and it's controlled by the proposed legal agreement. Moving up through the floors, this is the second floor plan, and the arrangements are very similar at 3rd and 4th floors. At the 5th floor, following extensive negotiations with officers, the proposal has been reduced by a storey in height with multiple upper floor setbacks that are easier to read on plan. Here at the 5th floor, the first setback, adjacent to the terrace at Paul Street, here, can be seen, with an amenity terrace for office workers provided. At the 6th floor, the proposal is similarly set back, adjacent to the Tabernacle Street terrace. Yeah. Further setbacks at 7th floor allow the massing to step down towards the terraces on Paul Street, while elsewhere it's now set back from the main building line. At the 8th floor, the massing drops away the corner of Tabernacle Street and Leonard Street. And the 9th floor is greatly reduced in size, being for plant only. Committee report also examines the amenity impacts of the proposal in detail. Many of the surrounding buildings are in non-residential use, which helps to mitigate the impacts it has. Even so, with regard to daylight and sunlight, 2 properties are shown to have significant impacts: 66 to 68 Paul Street here, and City Lofts on Tabernacle Street here. The impacts to the nearest units of City Lofts are particularly significant, as has been pointed out in a number of objections to the scheme from occupants of that building. These units are single aspect studios at first, second, third and fourth floor levels. And while the building was converted to live work units at the upper floors in the 1990s, those units in C3 residential use have become so by the use of certificates of lawfulness. As per the committee report, it's considered that the impacts to these city lofts properties are mostly resultant of the proposed building using a more typical amount of plot coverage than the existing post-war building, which sits in the middle of its site. While it's considered desirable in townscape and conservation terms that the proposal restores the historic building line, that does mean that it comes closer to existing buildings than the modernist building it replaces. In that sense, the proposal is considered to fit adequately well within the existing urban grain, and the impacts to daylight and sunlight to the 8 units in question are considered to be insufficient grounds to warrant refusal of the application. Nevertheless, that conclusion is reached on balance, and the committee will wish to consider this for themselves. In terms of overlooking, the scheme as originally submitted allows for views to the rear, which may have increased the level of overlooking of the city lofts building. As such, the applicant has agreed to obscure glaze these windows, and a recommended condition ensures that this will remain the case. I'll have to come back to that one. Turning to the elevations, as is laid out in the committee report, in design terms, the proposal is considered to be of a very high quality, and following the reductions in scale during the course of the application and work carried out on the architectural detailing, it's considered to be of an appropriate character for this sensitive location. The building is an increase in scale for the site, but would replace an existing building that is considered to be a negative contributor. From street level, the building will be experienced as stepping up from the terraces of Tabernacle Street, here, and of Paul Street, here. Nevertheless, even at its greatest height, where it fronts Leonard Circus, the frontage of the building is a little lower than agreed recently for the development house corner of the circus, as can be seen on the lower image here, on the left-hand side, where the consented development house building appears. Following slides show the proposal in the streetscape. This verified view shows the existing situation on Paul Street with Telephone House in the background. The proposed view demonstrates how the step-ins work to mitigate the impact on the terrace and how the historic street line is restored up to Leonard Circus. The cumulative view also shows Development House in the background. This time the view is north up Paul Street, as a cumulative view with Development House again on the left-hand side. And the 49 to 51 Paul Street Hotel is in the foreground on the left. The view on the corner of Leonard and Tabernacle Streets is particularly important because of the chapel on the left, which is a non-designated heritage asset within the conservation area, and the Grade 2 listed Central Foundation Boys School behind that. This is existing and as proposed. The building is set back slightly from the red line boundary at this corner, which allows greater space for public realm and a better appreciation of the chapel building. This cumulative view shows the 8-story extension to the boys' school, facing Tabernacle Street and currently under construction. This extension is higher than the main proposed frontage of Telephone House here and helps mitigate the harm to the listed building. Overall, in conservation terms, while there is some harm identified from the height and massing of the proposal on the setting of neighbouring heritage assets, this harm is considered to be less than substantial. This existing view looking west down Leonard Street is taken from outside the Grade 1 listed St Michael and All Angels Church, subject to a recent planning permission to build upon the yard that you can see on the left. As proposed, the building is considered to sit well within its surroundings. While it's clearly of a greater scale than the buildings within the conservation area, with the reductions during the course of the application, the proposed height and massing is considered acceptable. Turning to the view over the Clare Street car park, this is as existing. The level of bomb damage can be imagined from this angle. This is as proposed. And the cumulative view is also instructive. The proposal site, Development House, 4951 Paul Street, and this car park site were all left outside of the South Shoreditch Conservation Area because of the poor quality of the post-war buildings and spaces. As such, they presented a development opportunity that is not common in the local area. This is the view down Leonard Street looking east. The stretch of Leonard Street in front of the proposal site has recently been closed to traffic, with a temporary surface laid. This is in advance of the council's permanent works to extend the Leonard Circus surfaces and build upon the success of the Leonard Circus remodelling. The proposed heads of terms in the legal agreement would provide a public realm contribution of £845,000 towards this, £676,000 of which would mitigate the open space deficit in respect of the future office workers identified under local plan policy LP48. The conclusion of this committee report is that this should be found acceptable. The final set of views looks south down Tabernacle Street. Here the proposal is at the end on the left. It can be seen how it steps up from the Victorian terrace and relates well to the scale of the boys' school extension opposite. This is the same angle, but a view from closer up. The Cycle Cafe can be seen at ground floor level, activating that section of the street. The conclusion of this committee report is that with regard to public benefits, the proposal's high design quality, the increased level of employment provision and the activation of the Leonard Circus frontage, amongst other matters, would meet the public benefit test to balance against any less than substantial harm it causes to the setting of the heritage assets. Overall, the proposal is considered acceptable in conservation and design terms. Turning to sustainability, the proposed energy strategy is considered very robust and to show a strong commitment to the sustainability agenda. It includes many energy efficiency measures, and there are a number of conditions to ensure the sustainability of the building is carried out effectively. A BREEAM rating of outstanding will be achieved for the offices and BREEAM excellent for the retail. The building will use air source heat pumps and renewable technologies in the form of photovoltaic panels to be provided on the roof, which will help to meet electricity demand. The scheme exceeds the minimum 35% reduction from the carbon baseline, achieving 45%, in line with the GLA and Hackney energy policies. The shortfall from net zero is 270 tonnes per year, requiring a carbon offset payment of £618,000 to be secured through the proposed legal agreement. Since this is a referable scheme, the GLA have provided detailed scrutiny and detailed conditions in respect of circular economy and whole life cycle carbon. Controlled by the proposed conditions, the measures are in excess of local and regional policy requirements and are considered to be acceptable. In addition, the scheme delivers biodiversity net gain and a policy-compliant urban greening factor of 0.3, largely through extensive greening at the upper level terraces. So to conclude, the proposed application is considered to be policy-compliant. The use is appropriate for the priority office area with its ground floor providing an active frontage onto Leonard Circus. The proposal represents a high-quality design that would enhance this sensitive site. As is detailed in the committee report, in these and other respects, the scheme is considered acceptable. It's recommended for approval, subject to conditions in the legal agreement.
Great, thank you very much, Nick. As the lights raise, we have both objectors and applicants here this evening. So objecting, we have Kevin Plaster and Eduardo Ruboldazzi. Is that yourselves? Hello, great. Thank you. Are you both planning to speak? Yeah, so you've got 5 minutes to share between the two of you. Who is speaking first? Great. You're Eduardo, great, thank you. Do you want a notification when it's 2.5 minutes, or? I'm sorry? Great, fantastic. Do you want a notification when it's 2.5 minutes? Yeah, great, fantastic. Great. In your own time, please, please start. Okay. Laurie, could I ask you to turn your microphone on using the bottom right-hand button? Bottom right.
Image with the
Should work now. Can you hear me? Okay, good evening again. My name is Eduardo Riboldazzi. I own a flat in City Lofts, a mainly residential building which will be greatly affected by the proposed development. I've been asked by the manager of City Lofts, Warmans Limited, to speak today on behalf of the building, which includes 27 residential units. First, we would like to thank the Hackney Planning Subcommittee for giving us an opportunity to voice our concerns about the Telephone House planning application. We hope this meeting will help us influence the proposed development so that its most adverse impacts on the City Loft community can be somewhat mitigated. Such impacts are manifold, but they all originate from the sheer scale of the scheme and its extreme proximity to City Lofts. More specifically, if the scheme is left unaltered, it will seriously diminish the light intake of all the 15 rear-facing flats in City Lofts. The new building will extend well beyond the height and the footprint line of the current telephone house, which have remained unaltered since City Lofts was converted from a warehouse into a mainly residential building in 1999. The scheme will eliminate the space between City Lofts and the surrounding buildings, which is vital to ensure us access to natural light. As an example, the back street leading to the loading bay of the current telephone house will be entirely filled up by the new development, depriving the rear-facing flats of City Lofts of their main source of light. The applicant has tasked the surveyor point 2 to produce a daylight sunlight report, which claims that 46 windows will experience daylight reduction as measured by the vertical sky component metric VSC in excess of 20%. A subset of 28 windows, which we estimate to service about 10 flats, will experience VSC losses in excess of 30%. Importantly, a further subset of 9 windows will suffer from VSC losses in excess of 50%, and 5 windows within this group will experience VSC losses above 70%. The situation doesn't improve if we look at the sunlight matrix shown in the appendix of the same report. In this case, the surveyor seems to assess the impact on a room basis as opposed to a window basis. We would like to remind the planning subcommittee that, as the name of our building suggests, most of the flats located in City Lofts are single-room flats. So the number of affected rooms should be viewed as roughly equivalent to the number of affected flats. Keeping this in mind, the report estimates that 14 rooms will suffer from annual sunlight losses in excess of 20%, 5 rooms in excess of 50%, and 4 rooms in excess of 70%. For what is worth, according to the report, my flat will be subject to a 100% loss of sunlight, which makes me wonder how this scheme can represent a form of sustainable development. We would like to dispute the following statement from the light report. It is felt that this sunlight loss is a consequence of the design of the property, City Lofts, rather than simply as a result of the proposed development, and can therefore be considered arguably acceptable in planning terms. We dispute this claim. The developer and their advisor are shifting responsibility to the residents of City Lofts of the lack of a more sustainable proposal and the refusal to engage with us in a constructive way, other than some performative consultation sessions that didn't have any meaningful influence on the design of the development. Some City Lofts residents are also concerned about the loss of privacy that these schemes, or the loss of privacy that this scheme will cause to their flats. These residents fear that their living space will be subject to constant scrutiny from the workers located in the office spaces that in some points we estimate to be less than 3 meters away from the windows of our building. We hope that the Hackney Planning Subcommittee can appreciate the harm that this scheme is posing to City Lofts residents. Our building hosts a close-knit community, among the last ones still living in the area, in an area where commercial developments and hotels are becoming increasingly common. We think it's essential for the social and economic diversity of this area to make sure that City Lofts remain a living space.
Yeah, so okay.
Please go ahead.
And in terms of what I wanted to, notwithstanding what has been said already, in terms of the west elevation of the ground floor seems to be set back. At the moment, I don't think there's been much thought about that design in terms of how the even late night economy works in the air with the Club XOYO and the Q Bar. They probably use that as a setback area, as a hanging out space. So I think that should be redesigned in terms of the condition if it is subsequently approved. There's also I've got concerns about the event space. It does refer to a restaurant and a drinking establishment with it in a condition that is proposed at 8.1.27, which is contrary to an earlier condition that talks about no primary cooking. In addition, the queuing, the operational management plan, I don't think would be strong enough in terms of ensuring that the effect of the secondary door would not cause queuing issues in relation to the people at City Lofts. I would like to propose a condition that restricts that secondary door to emergency purposes only. And just one final thing as well is that there's so much other development being approved. Council House, Development House, Confederation Store, Tabernacle Street, 36 to 44. And in terms of the traffic management plan proposed, it needs to be more stronger so that all these developments have a coordinated approach. It needs to have something in the conditions to do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Would you mind turning your mics off? Is that right? Thank you. Could you turn your mic off, please?
Sorry.
Thank you. In support, we have the applicants, Richard Selby. Could you raise your hand just so I know who you are? Great, thank you. And then we have members of the team, the applicant team, to answer questions afterwards, I think. So, Richard, when you're ready, please start.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I wonder, given that Kevin was only given a minute there, if he wants to eat into some of my time, and then I'll accelerate through my speech.
No, it's okay. Please carry on.
Okay. Chair, members, my name is Richard Selby. I'm the partner of Brockton Everlast. We're the owners and the applicant. We're a long-term UK investor focused on high-quality, sustainable commercial workplaces. Our expertise and our portfolio of assets in London and the UK predominantly around three areas: flexible and co-working offices, centrally located net zero urban offices, and life science buildings in London, Oxford, and Cambridge. We've been in this sector for decades. We believe we've developed an acute understanding of what it takes to provide well-designed, long-lasting, multi-generational, sustainable, and commute-worthy workplaces. And whilst the events of the last few years have accelerated many of these trends, we're still very confident the design proposals in front of you for Telephone House meet and exceed the emerging and evolving new ways of working. Locally, you may know some of our buildings. We recently completed Montacute Yards at the foot of Shoreditch High Street, and the mass timber or cross-laminated timber development known as Black and White on Rivington Street. Both projects are operated in their entirety by a co-owned and co-working business of ours, and they provide around 100,000 square feet of accommodation, but more specifically, I guess, in the new way of working, nearly 1,500 desks and a range of companies and businesses of all shapes and sizes, from individual entrepreneurs, businesses like Liberty Design, which is a local retail marketing agency, right through to Ocado. Telephone House, as the subject property, was built in the 60s, and as the officer said, it's pretty unremarkable. It's probably its weakest element. It's set back from key frontages. It prioritizes on-site car parking with over 32 spaces, and it fails to respond to the existing grain character or context. In fact, all of the pre-war conditions. We've been in a long and detailed dialogue with the local authority for over 2 years, trying to find a way to unlock a design proposal that navigates the complex nexus between sustainable environmental design, but the spatial demands of a next generation long-lasting office building, whilst also recognizing the complexity of weaving a building in around existing neighbors and respecting the historic context. We've pursued these discussions whilst actively managing the building and meeting the needs of existing occupiers, a majority of whom are going to stay in occupation for the best part of the next 3 years. If we're successful in securing planning consent, then we'll coordinate implementing these works around a planned vacant possession strategy, giving us lots of time to discuss these plans with our neighbours, our tenants, and develop the very construction, logistic, and management design and procurement plans that Kevin was just talking to at the end of his session. Our entire design approach is driven by environmental imperative. It's driven by an aspiration to meet the lowest possible whole life carbon. The key initiatives that I'd like you to take away is we'll be thinking about, and we have planned, a careful reuse of our demolition materials. We've got just under 20% of the existing building being retained. And that's not just any 1/5 of the building, it's the most carbon intensive element of the building, the basement and the foundations. And also for our neighbours, it's the area that would otherwise cause the most disruption through construction. When we think about the design for the new elements, it's a fabric first approach where we try and get the elevations to perform in such a way that the mechanical and plant doesn't have to work hard. So we think about making sure the building firmly performs and responds to the solar gain. We're also responsive to innovative ways of constructing and very innovative materials. The building will be a mixed mode ventilation with opening windows to all facades. What does it all mean? I think in fairness, it means we're going from a car-centric building to a people-centric building that repairs the missing urban fabric along Paul Street, Leonard Street, Tabernacle Street, and Leonard Circus, with an exceptionally high-quality, modern but contextual piece of architecture designed by Piercy & Co, who are here today. The sustainability imperative that's embedded in the design goes above and beyond current policy targeting, which is very much an imperative driven by Brockton. Some of the metrics you've heard about, and so I won't repeat them, but we're basically exceeding all carbon metrics. The new building will deliver a best-in-class new workplace and can support twice as many jobs as the existing building. with 10% safeguarded as affordable for Hackney businesses, SME, at the discount rate that was talked to by the officer. The project should nearly double the economic output for the site. And just to put into scale, the proposal will make direct financial contributions to Hackney and the GLA, with about £2.5 million of Section 106 contributions and 750,000 in SIL going to Hackney, plus a further £2.5 million of SIL contribution payments to the GLA. The design proposal and its
That's
relationship.
time. Can you wrap up?
Sorry, yeah. Just I think maybe just to add on about the neighbours, because it's so important. The eccentricity of the 60s building and its awkward symmetry to the historic context has resulted in temporary conditions to the neighbours' amenity and as a consequence, they've enjoyed passages of light through open service yards. There's no question that by repairing the historic fabric in the way we are creating impact. We have been talking to them for the last few years. We have adjusted the design, and we try to ameliorate that. We have our rights of light expert here, Daylight and Sunlight, to talk to the neighbours should we need to.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Great. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Questions from the committee? Who's going to kick us off? Councillor Narcross, then Councillor Desmond. Councillor Narcross first.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to start off picking up on a couple of points that were raised by the objectors. Firstly, just clarification over the event space. My understanding is that the retail space on the ground floor is Class C, so that won't be a restaurant. But it talks, where is it? 6.3.8, it talks about the unsuitable uses for the event space, which will be secured by a condition, but then it talks later on about the restaurant, drinking establishment and event space is kind of one. I was just getting some clarification of what that event space might be used for and whether it would be a restaurant and how that relates to the classes for the kind of commercial units on the ground floor as well.
Yeah, can you start?
I can make one point. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to be used for, but I can tell you that it's not going to be used as a restaurant because there is a no primary cooking condition on there, which means that you couldn't. It's essentially because there's no extract flue going up, so you wouldn't want to have a restaurant there, creating all that odor and smoke possibly. So we've put that condition on, so it wouldn't be that.
Thanks. Anything else, Councillor Narcross? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and the other one was just in terms of the loss of lights to city lofts. Obviously, we've got figures here in the report. The figures the objector mentioned were different and seemed substantially higher than the ones in here. I just wanted to get some kind of clarification on where those two different sets of figures came from.
Great. Yes, no problem. So I brought up a window map, which I thought might be reasonably instructive. And maybe we'll just look at this one first. So essentially City Lofts, which is here on this side on Tabernacle Street, has a relatively open view here past this service yard, effectively, on both sides. That does give more light than you would have expected from, say, the bomb damage situation, where it effectively would have been a light well. So it is true, for example, to say that some of the VSC is like 70% reduced, and you could do that for the 46 windows that have been mentioned and are in the Daylight Sunlight report, and you can look at it. But for example, one of the ones that's reduced, the biggest reduction of 74% loss, goes from, if we think in terms of mid-teens as being a sort of reasonable inner city, central London kind of level for VSC, this is already at 3.8. And so when you have the loss 74% down to 0.99, what you're really looking at is something that you wouldn't notice that much, even though it's a big percentage loss, it's just already quite a small number. So if I take you to the next slide, we can start talking about the windows that would be most, in my view, affected, having seen these sort of things before. So windows 1 to 8 along this side are the ones that are most affected. And it's quite difficult. Obviously, the Daylight Sun report has a lot of figures in it, and it's quite difficult maybe to summarize them, but I thought I'd give it a go in the sense that at VSC, your VSC gets up to what we think of as mid-teens by the time you get to your third floor. And in terms of APSH, which is the sunlight figures, by the time you get to the fourth floor, there's still not very good winter sunlight. because the building being up against it means that those low angles in the winter, they are like brought down a lot, and therefore the percentage terms is a lot as well. So they're not high at the moment, but they come down to 0 up to about the 4th floor from memory in winter sunlight, but they get in annual probable sunlight hours, which is the percentage of sunlight hours you would get over the year. They get up to what would be considered a reasonable level of about 25% by the time you get to the 4th floor. And as has been said already, there is, by simply building up to the red line boundary, unlike the Bristol building that's there at the moment, there is going to be a significant impact. How much more significant it is because of the scale of this building, well, it's been brought down during the course of the application. We think that it's now at a reasonable level, albeit that these are significant impacts and need to be considered by committee as such. The reason for the difference between the figures is because whereas, for example, the objectors are looking at just simply the amount of windows that are affected, we would look at maybe the percentage reduction going down to what would be considered a reasonable level. And then those ones that are still at a reasonable level, we wouldn't think of as being affected in a way that would suggest refusal of the application, for example. The applicants have brought their people if you have other questions, but that's essentially the situation.
Can I make an intervention on that?
I can bring you in. Obviously sunlight daylight is probably one of the most significant sort of impacts on city lofts. I mean, you disagreed with the figures.
I don't disagree with the figures. We simply counted the figures that were reported in APIS on the report to estimate the number of the most affected windows. I just want to highlight the fact that even when you consider the percentage reduction, the starting point is quite low. We're not talking about flats that are benefiting from lighting day to start with. So when we're talking about the 70 reduction, it's from a starting point of flats that are already quite dark. So that would mean that those flats would basically be in permanent darkness, some of those.
Okay, thank you. Does the applicant have any comments on sunlight daylight?
Yeah, we do have Liam Dunford from Point 2 with us, who can answer any kind of specific technical questions. I think the case officer's answered the point really quite clearly, and I think it's a question of when one looks at daylight, there are two steps. First of all, it's establishing whether there is a notable impact, and that's the 20% threshold. So if there's more than the 20% change, that is defined by the BRA guide as being noticeable. Then the question is the level of impact, particularly the retained level of daylight to those properties, acceptable in the context of the particular project? And I think you've heard from the case officer that in this instance, that context is really relevant because the physical relationship between the existing building and our neighbours is very much a product of that 1960s plan form, which means that there are bits around the building where light can currently pass, but that isn't particularly contextual for Shoreditch. And I think maybe the assurance that we can give you is that the level of retained daylight that the properties will receive is very similar to the levels of daylight that you generally see around some of the more densely developed bits of Shoreditch, where you have got that fine, those close building relationships. So I think we've struck an appropriate balance. We have strived to reduce the impact on our neighbours, both in terms of the numerical daylight, but also by stepping the building back and using obscure glazing in order to create a better relationship. I think, in our view, on balance, the result of our scheme will maybe have a bigger building next to City Lofts, but a better looking building that presents a better outlook. So at the moment, City Lofts looks over a service yard, an exposed open service yard. We're internalising all of our servicing so that we become a better neighbour and cause less disruption to our neighbouring properties. So I think one has to look at these things in the round. As I say, Chair, I'm happy if you have any specific technical answers that Liam can answer them, but I think the case officer's covered the point.
Thank you. Any other questions on? Yep. So is that yes, Councillor Nagos? No, Councillor Sadek?
On the light issue, is it a case of essentially to go ahead with something that broadly looks like the proposals that we're seeing today, the disturbances, the light, the impact on light to City Lofts and other properties is inevitable, or would say stepping it back a little bit or reducing the height a little bit have a significant impact?
No, Chair, is the simple answer. It of course is a product of the proposed massing insofar as the building causes an obstruction. But just because of the way in which the grain of this part of Shoreditch works, the fact that the buildings sit where they sit, I think any development on the site, even a modest extension to the existing building, would probably give rise to a very similar level of impact on the neighbouring property. So it is of course a product of the size of the building, but it's not a linear relationship, if that makes sense.
Thanks so much. Councillor Desmond?
So we have the Hackney Society unhappy with it, but the Shoreditch Conservation Area Advisory Committee happy or seemingly happy with it. It's like Harry Hill would say, fight between the two of them, but it's a shame the two of them have different views. It says in one part here that it's going to be brick built, which I approve of. I think it does mention cladding, so could you confirm that it's brick built predominantly? The other couple of things I want to say, have you been consulting with the residents of your neighbours? We do believe in community relationships here. And also regarding 819, I'm sure building control will advise you of appropriate building time so that neighbours not unreasonably disturbed. Have you done an asbestos survey with regard to demolition?
Nick, can we kick off with you and then, or your officer team? So the first one, it's probably worth pointing out that the Hackney Society responded to the original application. I think it's changed since, is that right?
That's right, yeah. It says in the report to the design originally submitted, so that might be a little bit of the this discrepancy, although they have been known to disagree with each other in the past as well. I don't want to speak for them, but yeah, that might be the reason.
Great. And then materials, who have we got?
It is largely brick. Yes.
Yeah. And then
Yeah, we maintain an asbestos register and a daily report, an annual report on recovery and remediation. There is minor asbestos that's contained within the building.
Councillor Desmond, sorry, would you mind using your microphone? Sorry, thank you.
So there is some minor asbestos, and we'll be taking appropriate measures during the course of demolition to ensure it doesn't cause any risk.
That's correct.
Good. And the times in terms of the demolition, is that going to be in line with building control arrangements and regulations negotiated with them, or statutory obligations?
That's also correct.
Okay, other questions? I've got a few. In terms of biodiversity, is that one for Matt and Adam, or it depends on my question? Fair enough. The biodiversity increase, is that considered to be good? I know it's got a 0 rating as it is currently, but it's going up a bit. I wasn't sure whether that was a lot in terms of the numbers or not.
So the UGF at the urban greening factor at 0.3 is policy compliant. In terms of the raise, obviously net gain through 0.0 is infinite, so that's not that helpful. But at 0.3, they have done quite a lot of work to make those terraces green.
Okay, great. And then I have a question on green walls for the applicant. Who is able to answer that for me? My question is, I see less of it now, but a lot of green walls don't survive and they look awful. What's the sort of guarantee that these green walls will, given that they're part of the biodiversity gain anyway, are going to be well kept and functional for a longer period of time?
Chair, I think I agree. Yeah, great green walls look great, and the poor ones look a little bit sorry. They tend to be more successful on commercial buildings. I think it's probably a lot to do with the management. This building will be very, very actively managed and maintained by Brockton. The landscaping scheme is very detailed, far more detailed than we would normally see at planning. And as part of that is ensuring that the irrigation systems are actually designed in now in order to ensure that the green terraces and the green walls can actually be realised and actually will thrive long term. So we've done a lot of work on that front to make sure that these aren't just an idea, but they can actually be delivered and will be sustained long term.
We've reduced the amount that the green walls factor into the urban greening factor, so that is there's a reduction in those, and a significant proportion of those are realised through climbing plants. So it's not stuck onto the side of the building. It's buildings that, plants that naturally want to climb up and are planted in suitable planters, so will last a lot longer.
Okay, great, thank you. And then sustainability. So sustainability is outstanding BREEAM, is that
For
right?
the offices, excellent for the
Yeah.
retail. So the, what we would expect is excellent, so outstanding is an improvement on policy.
Okay, great. But there's it's still not net zero, is it? It's 270 tons a year, is that right?
217, yeah, so technically it is net zero because it's got the carbon offset, but you do need the carbon offset to get there.
Yeah. So what's either Nick or the applicant, what's stopping the building from being net zero? Is it technology or is it lack of, I don't think it's lack of effort, but
No, our sustainability officer is not here.
Mhm.
She would have many thoughts. This has been a long process with the applicants, but I think it's probably fair to let them answer that question.
yeah, okay. Applicants, why can't we get it to net zero
Yeah,
without the
I
carbon
think
credits?
that's the utopia. I think the only way you get to net zero without some kind of offset. I mean, the idea is to build a building that's designed with an environmental imperative from the fabric, from the outside in, engineer the building and use materials that are truly sustainable to try and drive down both the embodied and the environmental and the operational carbon to minimize the life cycle carbon. You can't get to a zero unless you're building basically a building that has got no services in it. What you try and do is deliver the most sustainable building you possibly can, and then you offset. I think what's happening a lot at the moment is people are just choosing to offset. Perhaps the environmental imperative that's embedded in the design isn't there. At the moment, just to give you an example, we've minimized the embodied by retaining the 20% of the fabric of the building, which is obviously the substructure and foundations where most of the carbon is embodied. And in operational terms, it is an all-electric building with recovery in solar and other energy sources. And from an operational energy perspective, going forward for over 60 years, when you measure it from a life cycle perspective, it's trying to hit 55 kilowatts per hour per meter squared, which is per year, which is hardly any operational energy. So energy in use, once you've built this building, is phenomenal. Embodied carbon is carefully contained by retaining the basement, and that ameliorates some of the carbon emissions through construction and demolition. And then we use other techniques and methods through construction. Ultimately, it's about demonstrating, I think, that you're a responsible approach to try and minimize your overall carbon through the life cycle of 60 years, rather than just saying, can it be a net zero carbon building? There isn't a net zero carbon building, I don't think, in the commercial world in the UK.
Are you building out of concrete, presumably? You're demolishing the current concrete floor and rebuilding it?
Yes, so at the moment we've got a hybrid design grid that works both for a CLT, a cross-laminated timber, and a concrete. So it's a proprietary grid which allows us to move both ways. And then when it comes to the concrete, we go because the insurance market doesn't accommodate CLT for this size building yet. Then we've got the ability to start over the next 3 years to really investigate into low carbon cement, which is really the key. I mean, that's really where most of the carbon for concrete, as well as the sort of logistics of concrete as well. So we're going to drive down those numbers, but at the moment we are well below the 600 kilograms of carbon per meter squared, which is, to be honest, is moving you into sort of, if you were looking at it on another category for Letty or Neighbours, it's basically best in class.
Great, thank you. And then one of the other elements is the impact on the heritage assets in nearby and then on the conservation area as well. So Nick, you obviously went through this in the presentation, but I think the point around the boys' school is that they are already adapting that building anyway. Is that right? So in terms of the impact on that, did you say it's non-designated heritage asset?
The chapel is, the boys' school itself is grade 2.
But they're already
Yes.
renovating it, I think.
When I first came to this application, my thought was that the impact on that central foundation boys' school might be problematic for this, but I was surprised to see the decision that Islington had made to allow an 8-story building directly on the site. And once that's there, having a frontage that's lower than that, considered would not be.
Yeah, so that sets the tenor. Okay, thank you. Just going back to the event space. So the event space is within the building, separate to the retail units. The retail units will be the use class that they are, and then we'll have to apply for licensing separately if they need to, conditioned within this planning application for use and the timings. That's right, isn't it? So times that it can be used.
So it's sui generis. so effectively allows us to really decide what that is through the condition that's been put on, that they'll come to us and they'll tell us how they intend to operate in terms of what goes in there, how long for. They're also been on with hours of use. And they're kind of the most important one, I think, is the overarching, you can't make noise above background level. It can't be experienced above background level at neighbouring properties. Once that's on there, you have everything else that falls into place. But the operational management plan will also cover things like, should queuing be needed, how is it managed, things like that.
Right, thank you. Yes.
I appreciate what you're saying about that, but ultimately an AOD doesn't go out to public consultation. So in terms of how that affects people who are directly next to the event space, I think that is something that it needs to be thought of at the condition stage now. We were told exactly the same down Cowper Street about the event space that we're going up number 32. And it's transpired over the year that it's become Club XOYO in that respect. So I think that in terms of maybe a condition needs to be stronger than what you're suggesting, and a number of people going in and out of it as well. So with that secondary exit, which would be right next door to our exit at City Lofts. And I don't think that can be controlled by conditions at the outset now, and not by a plan that doesn't go out to public consultation at all later in the process.
Shall I answer that?
Yeah, Nick, can you?
So I suppose the important thing is that we will get to look at it. You're right that you haven't consulted upon it, but the fact that we will get to look at it and consider what we think would be the best way of operating it, and then we can enforce against it later if there is an issue that isn't foreseen. But it might be helpful if applicants had something to say on what they're planning to do down there at this stage.
Yep,
Thank you. I think event space may be not quite the right term. This is a facility predominantly for the building. So this is primarily a space where occupiers of the building can do seminars, conferences, product launches, for example. This is not a venue for people to the site. We would very much like the local business to use the facility and actually come and hire it. But this is fundamentally and primarily there as a resource and a facility for people working in the building. Not an event space, certainly not intended to be anything that attracts lots of people. And that's certainly why we're very happy to have the restricted hours of use and the operational management plan, because of the type of space that we're creating and what we want it to be used for.
So why do you need it to live on?
Can we not have noises off? Thank you, Nick.
I was just going to suggest that we might also bring this condition back to committee if you wanted to see it, because its plan could be something that you had eyes on.
Yep. I think that'd be a good idea. For sure. Is there anything, so it's conditioned around times of usage, it's conditioned around noise. Is there any way that is there any way that can be strengthened, or is it with the condition simply to bring it back as a sort of operational plan be sufficient, do you think?
I think that's sufficient. I think we want to have a look at it. I think that if this space works as I expect it to work, which will be in conjunction with the office use, and Charles just mentioned that that's how they perceive it at the moment. And the operational management plan might well be something that defines a use quite simply that is not going to have any impact. But it's there, we can have a look at it at the time, and we do have those noise conditions, and we can look at things like queuing at that.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. I think it's fair to say that there's no expectation that we used in ways that residents wouldn't necessarily like, but that's not to say that in the future, new owners of the building or operators might want to do something different. So I think it's fair to bring the operational management plan back. That would be part of this process as well. So you'd have it would go out public consultation, I would have thought. Is that right, Nick? Or Natalie? It would be an item on here, so you could object to it. So presumably there is a process by which it was a condition.
We can consult if we think it's appropriate at the time. So, for example, if it came in and it looked like something that we thought consult at that time, and then it could come back here and you'd look at it, or if it was, as we maybe expect it will be, something that's relatively uncontroversial, we wouldn't necessarily need to do it at that time.
Okay. Could we commit here to doing the consultation, or would that be too much?
Yeah.
We have done that before.
We've done that before, so let's do that then. Thank you. Great. Indicate if there are any other questions on this. I'll take Councillor Sadek.
A quick follow-up on that event space, and apologies if I'm not reading the diagrams very well, but I just wondered, is that only accessible going through the building into the event space? Yeah, there's no sort of public. Okay. And is it usual for an event space to be used in the way that you've described a moment ago, to be so relatively large as compared with the office space around it?
So yeah, this comes back to our understanding of how the sort of new ways of working with what we do with our co-working business, which we have. And the examples there in the borough for you to see would be Montague Yards and on Rivington Street, which I mentioned when I was speaking. You'll see how in those buildings there's communal space, social spaces in the ground and lower ground that interconnect, that create a space for people to meet and gather. More and more now we're seeing people don't want to just sit at their desk all day. They want to have 3 or 4 different moments where they interact, socialize, and then move through their day and have a more sort of energetic and creative work experience. So these spaces are kind of used as just free-flowing space to socialize and interact.
Thanks. And then just one last question from me. I mean, the 8th floor setback, so this is the 6.4.43. So I recognise that the back does ameliorate the sort of 8th story, but given the conservation area, why is the decision made that we go above the sort of medium, sort of 6 or 7 stories at the maximum of the area within the conservation area? What's the thinking behind that?
I could answer that, but Matt.
Sorry, Matt.
Hasn't answered yet. Hasn't got to answer a question yet. So
yes, let's do that.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so it is 8 stories on Leonard Circus. The site is outside of the conservation area, so there is a distinction on Leonard Circus. You've got east of Leonard Circus, which is the conservation area where the scale drops down, and then inside the conservation area, sorry, outside the conservation area to the west, where the buildings step up in scale. And we've seen that with Development House, which is the site to the south, and other developments that are coming forward. So there is that distinction where it steps up. And it is still slightly lower than Development House on Leonard Circus. So that 8 stories is considered acceptable on that sort of side of the quadrant. So yeah, it does step up slightly, but we still think it's still sort of in keeping with other developments that have come forward in the area.
Great, thank you. And then I think just the final point for me around construction management plans, and obviously there was an application here a couple of, I think last month or the month before, for the Leonard Circus, at least one of the building in that area, and there's obviously a lot of development going on both on the Islington side and the Hanging side. So in terms of construction management plans and coordination of those through street scene, what's the process for that, and how can residents be sure that everything works together, if indeed they're being constructed at the same time?
So Brian in our street scene team, I mean, I can bring Joe in, but I know this. So Brian in our street scene team runs a monthly meeting with the various different people around that area who are building, and they get together and talk about problems and things like that. He also has in the construction management plan, there's a number, there's always a number there that you can contact the people that you need to talk to. So yeah, if there are any issues that come up, you can get hold of people and then make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm. And are we seeing the construction management plan back at the committee when it's developed?
Not typically for a construction management plan, no, because most of the expertise that we have for this is in our street scene and highways officers, and they will manage it. It also goes via noise pollution and air pollution people as well. So they look at it, they work with it, and I'm not sure that committee necessarily would be.
Okay. Can I encourage the applicants to take great care of the cycle route through Leonard Circus in that case? That would be good. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. So listen, it's obviously we've got residents here who are going to be impacted. So I don't think any, Nick, as I said, there will be reasonably significant impact on some of those places of living places in terms of daylight and sunlight and light generally. But overall, obviously, that's one consideration, rightly, in consolidation with lots of other considerations of relatively high quality sort of building. So do move to a vote? Yep. Great, okay. So if I get my piece of paper. The recommendation summary is to grant planning permission subject to conditions and completion of a legal agreement in relation to section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, including the conditions that we talked about this evening. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone for joining us, applicants and objectors. If you could clear the blocks, that'd be great, and we'll move on to the second substantive item. Thank you. Please.
Just Kate Matthews and obviously no objection.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
So.
Oh, hi, Louise. I thought you were online because I saw you online. Hey. So item 6 is Acme Works on Rendlesham Road. And Louise, you'll take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Right, so this is a planning application for the erection of another 2-storey extension to the existing building on 5 new residential units and just over 1,000 square metres of light industrial floor space. 7 units are being retained but enlarged on site. So this is the location plan. As you can see here, it's just to the north of Hackney Downs, adjacent to the new Park House development at 1A Downs Road, which is shown there to the west. The site is in a priority industrial area, but is predominantly surrounded by residential buildings to the north, east, south and west, including the Gypsy and Travellers site to the immediate east. Just to run you through some the view of the existing building with 1A Downs Road to the rear. This is the existing access from Rendlesham Road. As you saw in the site plan, it's a backland development with a driveway off Rendlesham Road. This is just a photo showing the existing building on the right there. A kind of service yard with car parking and containers. This is another image of the existing building, but facing the other direction. So this is looking north. And this is the yard as it is at the moment with the Gypsy and Travellers site to the rear. So this is the proposed development showing the eastern elevation. It proposes new 2-storey extension to the existing building, which you can see there in a kind of sawtooth style design intended to complement the industrial character of the existing. It also allows for light to the new development, both provides dual aspect units, but also roof lights at the top. It will be made of standing seam zinc with steel windows to provide a contemporary addition whilst complementing the brick of the existing building. The new building shown there to the left of the picture is also has a contemporary design, reflecting its uses with larger windows to the south, to the lower floors where it is in commercial industrial use, with the residential above. 2 stories of setback residential units are located at the top. It's considered that the proposed height is mediates between the taller buildings to the west at 1A Downs Road and the smaller residential buildings to the northeast and south. This is the proposed western elevation. The proposed development is for light industrial uses over ground, basement and first floors in the new building and ground and basement in the existing building. A viability assessment was reviewed on behalf of the council, and it was agreed that the application is providing the most industrial floor space viable, which is in line with policy. Approximately or just under half of the industrial floor space will be provided as affordable, which will be secured through the legal agreement. This will allow existing tenants to stay on site if they wish. This just shows the southern elevation. This is an image showing the proposed basement. As you can see, there's industrial floor space in both buildings with cycle parking. Light wells provide light to some of the lower units, but the lower units are connected to the ground floor by internal staircases. This is the proposed ground floor, showing both the space in both buildings, 2 blue badge spaces with cycle parking to the rear, and then a communal courtyard. This is the proposed first floor, new industrial commercial floor space in the new building. This is an existing floor in the retained building. I think 9 or 10 undersized residential units on this floor, which will be modified and enlarged to meet space standards. They're currently lawful due to passage of time. The proposed second floor shows you the proposed residential units. Third floor, proposed residential units again. And then 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. So these CGIs are slightly old. They were done for the original development before we had some changes made to the fenestration, and the sawtooth roof in particular. Stories, but it's now only 2. But it gives you a pretty good indication of what the overall design of the development is. This is a CGI showing the new shared surface that will come off Rendlesham Road and around the back of the building to provide access. And then just this final CGI showing the shared courtyard to the east of the retained building. It's considered that the proposal provides a high quality development, maximising of employment floor space and providing 25 new units for a total of 32 on site. Just to mention the addendum, it provided an additional paragraph on public sector duty, a condition for screening, and the 2 employment interests.
Was quite an abrupt tenant, that's all. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. I think, Richard, you want to grab your mobile phone, I think. So just before we get to Kate.
Great, thank you. And we have no objectors to this application. Thanks for the lights. And we have supporting Kate Matthews, Director of First Plan. Are you speaking? You're alone speaking to supporting with questions, is that right?
Yes.
Great. When you're ready.
Thank you. I won't need 5 minutes because obviously no objectors have decided to speak, so I'll be brief. The proposals before you tonight represent an opportunity to regenerate and make efficient use of this brownfield site. They follow lengthy pre-application discussions and further design development during the course of the application. The scheme will deliver clear, tangible benefits by increasing employment floor space and providing a significant amount of this as affordable commercial floor space, which will be leased at 60% of the market rates. The scheme will also provide a valuable contribution to the borough's housing stock by providing new, high-quality residential units on the upper floors. The existing residential on site is all studios at the moment, apart from one. and they're below space standards. We're reducing the number of studios on site from 15 to 7, and then bringing the remaining ones up to standards. We're introducing family 3-bedroom units together with a mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms. The proposals have been designed to complement the height of the neighbouring development at 1A Downs Road, which is up to 15 stories high, and whilst also respecting the lower surrounding buildings. The 9-storey element is located close to the height of 1A Downs Road, with the longer lower building providing an appropriate transition. The proposed landscaping, including shared amenity spaces, will provide a substantial area with the existing site. Schemes also being designed to be sustainable, reusing the existing building, providing car-free development, photovoltaic panels, air source heat pumps, suds, green roof, Swift bricks. We therefore urge you to support the application.
Thanks very much. Great. Questions from the committee. Councillor Sadek, then Councillor Desmond.
2 questions for me. One was just if you could tell us a bit more about the impact of particularly the tower on the Traveller site that's described as being adjacent to the site, and what thought has been given to that in the design. And then I just wondered on the bit of the development that where you're retaining the existing building. It's obviously brilliant from an environmental perspective, but you mentioned efficiency, using the site efficiently to redevelop and offer something new in a brownfield site that perhaps its use isn't being maximised. I just wondered what led you to choose to retain that bit of the building rather than knock it down and redevelop the whole site.
Louise, do you want to just take the question on the impact on the Traveller site from the architecture point of view first, and then move on?
So the 9-storey element, especially in Prep, was much further forward towards the Traveller site. So it's been pushed back so that it's set back quite a lot further into the site, as I said, closer to the taller buildings. It is worth noting that the Traveller site, the way it's arranged, it doesn't have any windows along the elevation where it meets the building. So its windows are only facing out towards the road. And so there'll be some windows looking down, but they'll mostly be looking at roofs.
And then any comment from you on that? But otherwise, sorry, it was the why retain the brick building.
On the massing again, it was really a question of pushing away to the far corner where the new 1A Downs Road 15-storey massing is, and provides a good landscape break in between those 2 sorts of areas. And then on the link element, I believe there's a green roof there as well to allow that sort of transition. In terms of reuse, the character of it, and obviously in terms of sustainability credentials, if we can reuse it, great. And we as a practice like working with existing buildings. So a lot of the stuff we've done over the last 15 years, ironically with Brockton, who were here before as well, has been reuse of existing buildings and then providing a contemporary element on top. So we think here the zinc works quite well with the existing brick and then the new building and brick as well. Yes or not? Sorry, I rambled.
And will you be retrofitting it to bring it up to standard in terms of insulation and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, naturally, yeah.
Great, thank you. Councillor Desmond?
I'm slightly surprised that we haven't got anyone from the Travellers site here to object, and also from the Landfield estate, which is next door. I did go to the TRA meeting quite recently, and they didn't mention this. So could I check firstly with the officer that the Travellers who are living in the various pitches there are aware of this, and also whether we sent information of it to the Tenants and Residents Association at Landfield Estate?
The Travellers site and the estate, I assume that's the estate to the north. Yeah. Yeah, so both the Travellers site and the estate were sent notification letters, both originally and as part of, we reconsulted, and they got letters then.
Okay, and the other thing for the developer, as you know, there's a major development at 1A Downs Road, which I supported, and there'll be an area within that, which will actually make it quite a bijou area. We might get Nigella Lawson moving to Hackney Downs, you never know. Could I ask whether you've had any contact with them? Because that's a massive development going on. And the second thing is, again, related to consultation, I know there were some changes in the arrangements, but I'm slightly concerned. The first press advert was more than 2 years ago in the Hackney Gazette. So are you sure that there has been adequate consultation in the general area?
In terms of adjoining owners, and sort of maybe Kate can step in as well, I know that there's sort of this site, and there's a site alongside it which is 13A, and then obviously 1A Downs Road. So I believe all three parties are in sort of constant communication because it's in everyone's interest. And we had a walk around 1A before this and we thought it's a very good development. So it's only in everyone's interest that they all cohesively work together, you know, in terms of creating a better urban environment and therefore a better product for everyone. I'm sorry, I missed the second half of that question was.
So I'm pleased about that because even though obviously they're a different company and it is somewhat piecemeal and fragmented, you know, we expect people to at least discuss matters, especially where there are, you know, joint interests. The second really is on this consultation, widely understood what's happening in the local community. So, I mean, are you satisfied that there has been adequate consultation with people on the Nightingale estate, which is quite close, which is part of the Landfill estate, and certainly the Travellers? As I've said, no one has actually raised this with me, which, you know, exactly, I don't know if you know philosophically, if people say 2 and 2 is 5, you know there's something wrong.
I think every now and then you deserve a bit of luck, but no. But in all seriousness, I think the landlord here is obviously, and they've owned the site for a number of years. I think it's 10, 15 years. I don't know, but I know they have a good relationship with the tenants on site. So there's a recording studio that have been there and have invested further onto the site, and the spaces are designed so that they can accommodate them as well. Hence the provision of twice the amount of space. So they're in constant dialogue, and also if existing tenants do want to stay on, I know the building's been designed in a way so the new build elements will be built, and then if people want to move across, can do. So this isn't a speculative developer.
Right. And the final thing, exactly as I said to the other developer, particularly since I'm a councillor for that ward, will you make sure that in terms of the work you carry out, you do it in, you know, close consultation with our building control department, which Natalie also authority is very strict, and that you're not working at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning, because it will, there's a lot of children who live there, so you must keep to the stated hours.
Again, I think it's similar to the previous applicant in terms of the landowner and the landlord don't sell their sites, so it's in their interest to make sure that the long-term
Yep, Councillor Narcross.
It was partly a follow-up to Councillor Desmond's question about 1A Downs Road. So if I'm reading it right, there's only one access point to the site, which is off Rendlesham Road. Is that correct? Obviously, that's quite a narrow sort of lane at the moment. You know, there's 32 units, and I appreciate that they're all car-free, but are we happy that that quite narrow bit of access is enough access to support, you know, people coming in and out of the development, deliveries, things like that? And also, there's a point as well, it talks about encouraging the applicant to enter into conversations with the development of 1A Downs Road about kind of creating some sort of like flow-throughs and sort of paths into that development, the site a bit more. I was just wondering if that had happened yet, or any progress had been made on, you know, making it into the development.
Louise.
So on the first point, yes, it is a very narrow access, and we are aware of that. It was designed as a shared space, kind of indicating that it's pedestrian priority, but there will be vehicle use primarily associated with the industrial uses on site. We have conditioned as part of the landscaping strategy further details of how that would be specifically designed in order to ensure that the impacts are minimised as much as possible. So traffic calming measures, things like that.
Okay. Just a question from me. It's probably just yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
What was that second part in terms of?
It was just about the point in there about
conversations with the 1A Downs Road about creating sort of thorough.
Exactly. Having gone back down to that development today and seeing it in fruition, I think the aspiration is to have similar sort of industrial commercial uses on our site, and that sort of marriage between the two would definitely want that to happen. Whether that happens or not, I can't promise. The aspiration is definitely there because it adds value to both panels. I'm sure they'll work together, hopefully, to make that come to pass.
Councillor Nichols, were you referring to basically whether they'd be self-contained and fenced off sort of areas, whereas there'd be a preference for people to be able to live?
Yes, so I think, so I can't remember exactly what the point was. There's a point in the report where it talks about the creation of pedestrian links to the adjacent development was recommended. And yeah, so my question was basically whether any of those conversations started and if that was still the intention, to try and create pedestrian links. So there's not just that one entry route that we discussed.
Right, yeah, I just want to reiterate that that very much is the intention. At the moment, it is fenced off, but with 1A, they have kind of left pathways, if you like, up to the fences that it would be relatively easy, subject to the agreement between landowners, to physically create those accesses through, which would really enhance the permeability of the site, but also in terms of building this, light industrial workspaces. If our site, which is site, can kind of build on that and have those flows through as well, I think it will be beneficial for everyone to kind of, build that up and have a more comprehensive scheme.
Thank you. Does the planning department have a view on the sort of permeability of the site and the future sort of that little pocket of Hackney Downs?
Yes, I mean, it's definitely something that we would like to see. We could probably add it to a legal agreement for this application. The only problem, like requiring that they didn't have a fence or there was access proposed. The only problem is because the other one's already been granted, there's no mechanism to require them to do it. So there's no active planning application that you could tie a requirement in for their side to link up. So it really is only kind of aspirational and relies on the parties working together.
Okay, cool, thanks. Great. Just on the makeup of the housing versus the industrial units, obviously it's a priority industrial area site. There is a reasonable amount of housing going on here. So obviously, is this considered to be industrial led or is it housing led, or what's the view?
I guess in terms of floor space, it's residential led. In terms of the viability assessment that was reviewed by the council's property advisor, the development is providing the most viable floor space for industrial on site. And I guess that's based on the fact that industrial has a much lower value. And so as much as they have, has been decided that it is the most viable. So our reviewer was happy with that they'd provided as much as they could.
Is it low cost industrial area, is that right? What's that in square feet? Does one do it? I think in square feet, sorry.
Square feet?
Yeah.
Times by 9.5, times by 10.
Times by 10, okay. So 4,700, okay, that's quite a lot for industrial areas, is that right? Reasonable sized?
Yeah, I think so. They've designed it as well so that their existing tenants can stay, which I think is helpful.
Yeah, I suppose the point is that there's no obviously affordable housing allocation because it's a PIA site, and then there is industrial on there, and it's affordable workspace. I'm just wondering whether the despite viability, obviously, but whether that's what we would want from if it was not a PIA, would you get more floor space or a bigger contribution through affordable housing?
Yeah, I think if it wasn't a priority industrial area, we probably would look to provide affordable housing, but the borough's supply of industrial land is so low and it's getting smaller, I think. So maximising it on this site, which is part of the priority industrial area, and has industrial uses on site already, was.
And the current tenants are welcome to stay if they wish to do so, is that right?
Yeah, but that's the existing music studios, I believe, so they're welcome to stay. And I think just to reiterate Louise's comment, I think in terms of industrial space, it's best used at lower ground and first, and that's where we've provided within the development. It's not going to be as efficient on floors above.
I just had one final comment, actually, on the police response. Have we been in touch? I know that they put in a response saying they hadn't met you, but they had reviewed the Secure by Design. I was uncomfortable with the risk of police aren't here rather than the actual crime elements. I thought it was relatively odd comment from them. I wonder whether we can get some more detail from them afterwards, potentially. But in terms of Secure by Design, obviously you'll be putting that forward as part of the next stage, is that right?
Is a condition, yeah.
As a condition, great, fine. Any other questions, Councillor Sadek?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up on the industrial, the industrial floor space, and I didn't hear the reference to what the existing industrial use that is there now, but I'm just wondering whether the sort of use class, if that's the right term, the sorts of activities that will be going on post-development can and will be similar. Obviously, to some extent, that's true. I don't know whether it just so happens that what's going on there now would fit within an industrial space within a residential context, but there are some industrial uses there must be that aren't appropriate to be done within a residential context, and whether we're therefore limiting or narrowing the industrial possibilities within this area as a result of the residential development.
I guess it's worth noting that there are already 15 residential units on site. So that kind of mixed use of residential and industrial has already been established. In terms of the types of uses, what was B1C, which is now EG3, they are by definition industrial uses that can be carried out within a residential area. And they are the ones I think that the applicant's proposing. I have allowed other ones. There are conditions to insulate properly between units. But the London plan especially does talk about the intensification of industrial sites and the provision of housing as a way to maximise industrial floor space on site. So that's pretty much what's happening here.
I think when we think of the word industrial, we think about steel smelting and things, don't we? But
There
interesting,
is a waste site on the site next door. So, I mean, they are uses that, well, a proposed waste site. Yeah, I think they'll be toward industrial part of the spectrum.
Great. Do you have any idea about what sort of, how you'll be marketing the units, what sort of you might want to encourage?
To be perfectly honest, no, not myself. I just think that the site, really offers an opportunity to build on and regularize what's already there, because the industrial's already there and the residential's already there, but it's a bit ad hoc. So this really allows it to move forward in a decent, long-term, viable way. But in terms of marketing of it, absolutely no idea at the moment. Sorry, especially where the climate is.
Got to build it first. Okay. Any other questions? No.
Yeah. It was, to be fair, most of my question was just asked by Councillor Sadek, but just on that point about mitigating the impact of the industrial on the residential. Obviously, you said that kind of principle's already been set by there being residential there. But if this was a sort of, a new scheme, is the levels of mitigation proposed sort of satisfactory? Would you be happy? Are we happy with that? Not knowing exactly what the industrial use would be on the site.
Yes, I think the conditions recommended by our Environmental Protection Officer, including background noise and insulation, are sufficient. pretty much to enable the industrial uses to continue while there are residents on site.
Okay. Great. Any other questions? No, great, thank you. In that case, let's move to a vote. So the recommendation summary is to grant planning permission subject to conditions and completion of section 106 legal agreement. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. That's unanimous again. So thank you for the applicants. Thank you to the officers. Could I ask on item 7, just moving on to item 7 for members, could I ask that you note the delegated decisions document or comment on it if you have any comments? Councillor Desmond?
Just a minor matter. On page 151, I'm pretty sure at the bottom 33 Evering Road is in Hackney Downs ward. It says Stoke Newington, and then over the page, not Brighton Road, but the two others, 18 Brook Road. I think that's more likely than not also to be in Hackney Downs. So if those 3 could be checked, I'd be grateful.
And Kynaston, isn't it? Can we just have a check on those addresses? Right.
And obviously we'll bring those back to the September meeting.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, they're coming back then if they're wrong. Do we note them now? Or
Well, I suppose if they're incorrect, that they probably not note them and come back to the September meeting amended. Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, I've had no other business notified, so that's item 8. Otherwise, the next date of the meeting is the 6th of September. I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you to the officers online and in the room. And otherwise, end of the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.